everyone, it's Valerie from Waking Up in Wonder, and I am here with one of my very best friends in the entire world, Nicole Boriski. And hey, Nicole. And we are going to talk today about being a better steward of the planet. And Nicole is very qualified to be talking about this and knows a heck of a lot more than I do. So I wanted to learn from her and to be able to share that with all of you. So, first of all, tell us where you are, because you are always, in the past, decades since we've been out of high school, it's like, where in the world is Nicole?
Middle name Carmen San Diego.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm in Southern California. I'm on Catalina Island. And do you want to see a little bit of it?
Yes, we do.
This works. I can pick this up, show you. Let's take a tour. So Catalina is about 29 miles off the coast of Los Angeles. Can you see? Yeah, that's my beach there, a little volleyball court, and, some nature. That's our dive deck where we lead children on pretty epic snorkels in the cove.
So gorgeous.
Yeah, it's we run an environmental education program. It's called the Catalina Environmental Leadership Program. And we take kids with their schools. They come out with their teachers and principals and parents and have either 3 or 5 day trips where they go snorkeling, they go hiking, they go through our garden and composting. I'll let you look at the palm tree there. And they learn about, sustainability and how nature in a healthy ecosystem is a sustainable system. And we try to take those lessons that we can learn in nature and incorporate them into, human communities, our cities, and how we can mimic nature to be more sustainable. So that's kind of the bread and butter of our program.
That is awesome. And what's your role there?
I'm an assistant director, and I've been here for 5 years, on and off. It's a seasonal thing. So I started out as an instructor. So I would lead groups of 15 kids and, one chaperone out on adventures, and you are always trying to, draw those lessons. We have 4 principles that we teach. It's everything is connected in an ecosystem, as well as humans to ecosystems. Everything runs on energy, the primary source being the sun. There is no waste in nature, so every, wasted item or, poop or animal dying or whatever it is going to be used as a resource by another. And biodiversity is good. That's the 4th principle, and that biodiversity is what keeps an ecosystem resilient.
Yeah.
So,
awesome.
Yes. Cool lessons.
Cool. So, and what were you doing educationally and all of that kind of led you to this point? And I guess that kind of also connects to just in general, if there were influences from your life growing up in lovely College Station, Texas, that you think contributed to you getting interested in doing all of this?
Definitely, yeah. I guess starting in the beginning, as a kid, my father would take my brother and I and our cousins. We were always out in nature. He has a ranch where he raises cattle and does deer hunting. So I was always just out, playing in the forest and going fishing and camping. And I think just that introduction to nature and the appreciation that was nurtured in me was purely through just exploring, and being a part of it. And I know that not every child is fortunate to have that, right? If you're raised in an inner city, there actually is a disorder that some children have. It's called nature deficiency disorder.
Wow.
It's a real thing. Child psychologists have seen that kids who have grown up in an urban environment and are never exposed to natural, anything really, when they're they freak out. And, it's something new and it's threatening to them when, normally that's where we've come from, so it's almost this disconnect from our roots. So I feel very fortunate to have had that, growing up and being able to just explore in a safe environment and see that, my father, even though he's a hunter and a fisherman, you could see that as well, doesn't that seem in conflict with nature? But I would argue that it actually creates a sense of conservation in any hunter, right? Because you need natural spaces, and you need, a habitat that's not fragmented by, urban sprawl in order to have a successful deer population, a healthy population. And so in that way, he wouldn't consider himself, I think, a conservationist. That word has, it's kind of crunchy granola.
A little too granola for Greg.
It really is, just like I think every hunter is. So
yeah. Well, and he uses, what he hunts, so he doesn't just kind of leave it there and waste
exactly.
it.
He's not a trophy hunter. He does have the whole, deer or hog or whatever it is processed, and then that will feed our family for, many months, which is pretty cool. So
Yeah.
I was vegetarian for a while, which I think was offensive to him, but I always eat what he cooks. If he catches or kills something, it's something that I feel comfortable eating because, often it might even be an invasive animal. Like if it's a hog, those invasive hogs in Texas are pretty bad. So when you kill one, it's awesome to know that you're eating something that was, wild and lived a full life, and then also it did a lot of ecological damage. So you're kind of like doing a favor eating it.
Right. So then you went to A&M and you studied.
I was environmental studies and Spanish, and it was in the College of International Studies. So you do a trip abroad. I was in Costa Rica for 6 months, and I not only did a research project there on hydroelectric versus geothermal energy, so looking at just different energy sources, and privatized versus public energy sources. And then after my studies there, I did a volunteer program in Gandoca, so it was on the coast, and it was a kind of flip side of that was protecting sea turtles, so collecting their eggs and protecting them from poachers, and then tagging and tracking the females to see what their life cycle was like, and kind of keep posted on them. So that was a lot of fun, really cool experience.
Yeah. And at that point, I mean, were you just kind of gonna go where the wind took you? I mean, you didn't have an idea of exactly what you wanted to do with your environmental education, right?
Right. I wanted to get into some kind of field research, and I went traveling after graduating university and thought, like, I'm going to get some cool job where I live in a tree and research some endangered species in, like, Colombia. And what actually ended up happening was I met someone who worked here at the kelp program, and she told me all about it. And I realized that through a few, different volunteer gigs that I had done while traveling, I realized through talking to her that I might have more of an impact on people who are from my own culture, right? And talking to kids that I can relate to, that I fully understand. It's not some outsider's voice.
Right.
I think the best way to influence change is to be able to relate to people. And, my Spanish is decent, but it's never going to be, I'm never going to be from a country where I'm going to feel like it's okay for me to come in and say, like, you should do this.
Yeah.
But
yeah, that's really tough.
It's pretty cool, to go to California and say, like, all right, I know where you're coming from, you know where I'm coming from, let's relate, let's have this conversation.
Right.
And I think that's pretty powerful, so.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And then you were in Alaska, right, on a fishing boat?
Yes.
Okay, tell us about that.
Kind of ironic. So after teaching 2 seasons of environmental education, I was desperate for a summer job, and I got offered a job on a boat as a cook and deckhand in Alaska. So yes, it was a fishing boat, and so we were, harvesting and catching fish with small groups of people. It was like usually 4 to 6 individuals who chartered the vessel, and so it was a small enterprise. Just me and a
not like mass,
Right.
Yeah.
So it was a commercial fishing, but we did, catch salmon and rockfish, halibut, and it was some of the most delicious fresh caught food that I've ever had. It was amazing, and getting to prepare it and see the whole process, catching your food, preparing it, enjoying it with people. It was actually really empowering, and you're just catching it with hook and line. It wasn't these massive trawling nets, so it felt, relatively sustainable. That in Alaska, that those waters in the Pacific are actually some of the most, rich and abundant in life. It's not one of the areas that's being completely overharvested. So, just to make myself feel better. But
no, speaking of sustainable fish, though, which we'll kind of get to in a little bit, what do we need to be doing and worrying about? But I'll never forget where was it? San Diego. Yeah. Yeah. When I was there doing something at UCSD and you came up from Catalina Island to hang out with me. This is like, what, 3 years ago?
Yeah.
And we went out. I think I was looking up on Yelp and some great sushi restaurant. And so we went there, and we're sitting right up at the sushi bar, and you're like, what was it, Blue Marlin or something?
Bluefin tuna was on the menu.
Bluefin tuna, and you're like, I can't believe you're serving that. And we had ordered edamame, and then we just left, because you're like, I just can't, I don't feel right staying here. And I was like, I love you. I think you even pulled out your little paper sustainable fish guide.
Yes.
That was great. Yeah.
I had a feeling that would come up.
Yeah,
What's funny was the waiter, he said, you're not the first person who has brought this to my attention.
Yeah.
And he understood and he'd heard it before. So I was like, well, that makes me feel a lot better that,
right.
This isn't some crazy thing they've never heard before. I'm not this psychopath.
Right. Well,
So,
and I also remember, we didn't go to the same college, but I remembered hearing about the work that you were doing with recycling at A&M. I don't remember exactly what that was, but
it was a part of our student government was the Environmental Issues Committee, and after I declared a major, I was like, that seems to fall in studying, and all the people who were in it were really cool as well, the other students, and so they needed a chair of the recycling committee. So I took that up, and our huge football stadium, Kyle Field, which has been demolished and rebuilt for no apparent reason other than we have money, don't know what to do with it. We noticed there was no recycling. There's Dasani water bottles and Coca-Cola everywhere.
Crazy.
Zero recycling. So I put on, my polo and had my little notebook and went up to the Coca-Cola distributing company in Bryan, Texas, and was like, hey. And I thought it was going to be this struggle. I thought it would be like me versus the man. And when I said, listen, your website is claiming that you're really, invested in the environment and that you make all these, moves and you're doing things, but there's no recycling bins. And the guy said, how many do you want? And it was so easy. I was like, really?
It's crazy. Okay. Like, how were they not already there?
Yeah. I mean, we had to do all the legwork, but
right.
we gave 50 bins to start the project, and we had to, clean them and collect them after football games. They're full of like dip and snuff and all this gross stuff, but yeah,
that's just I think it just captures your college experience with football was more involved with recycling and cleaning out gross receptacles, but yeah, that's awesome. So when I was thinking about this idea of just being a steward of the planet, we have such a responsibility with that, and obviously as just a human race, we're failing pretty epically at it at this point. But also, it's I don't know what's out. I mean, I think that the industrialization and just the constant consumerization and everything just churning out new stuff all the time is outpacing our education and our programs to deal with all of this. But I do know that more and more people care about it, right now than they ever have. And at the same time, it can be really overwhelming, because there's all these different magazines and media and all these things saying you can't do this, you can't do this. And then I know that for me and a lot of people like me, what happens is then we just get overwhelmed and we just say, well, I'm just not going to do anything, or I'll buy like the 7th generation cleaning products and I'll recycle things that I know are recyclable, and that's going to have to be good enough because I can't figure it out, So.
And it's hard. It's understandable because there are so many different, sources that have their hearts in the right place, and then they start combating each other for what's the best and what's the biggest issue that we have to deal with. And I think you're in the right place because you are aware of issues and you are doing what you can. And I think if everyone did that, we would be in a better situation, right? Mm-hmm. I think what worries me is the people who do have privilege and who do have access to this information and then don't do anything with it. So, bravo for you and the people who are like, okay, 7th generation is a thing. It's a little more expensive, but, I'm going to buy it because I feel that it's the right thing to do. That's a great start.
Right.
So.
And like you said, of course, the privilege comes into that because I can afford to spend a little more on my dish soap and things like that. And then, I have like a 65 mile, so 130 mile a day commute.
Right.
Oh, well, at least I drive a tiny car.
Right.
But,
and that's exactly, another issue is what are the things that we can change? Because some are pretty out of our control. Where you get a job and where you can live aren't always a mile from each other,
right.
It would be ideal if everyone could ride their bike to work, but we don't live in Europe. Our cities weren't set up. If you live in Houston or Los Angeles, you're not in a situation where that's easy. Yeah. So there's always, what else can you do,
Right.
Choosing things that are practical. And then for me, it's also choosing things that you enjoy. What's something that you're not going to like task yourself to do every day? Sure, a lot of these things do involve some sacrifice, but let's face it, like you said, the Industrial Revolution, it happened. So for us to go back to, living in igloos or teepees, depending on where you live, and, harvesting everything from the earth, it's not practical, right? We've got jobs. So what can we do? I think being practical about it is important.
So, like, with all the education that you do and all the different kind of aspects of this that you see with environmentalism and sustainability animal rights, all of these different things that we can be concerned with, other than sort of each person, you know, obviously if animals are your thing, then you can really focus your efforts on animals, or, you know, whatever, if someone's passion kind of pulls them in a specific direction, then that's great. But just for people who are going, I know I need to do more than I'm doing right now, but I don't know where to start, what would you think would be kind of the easiest, most accessible, best places to start?
For sure. So I think living in the culture that we live in, and you know, given that, like we said, you can't necessarily change your entire lifestyle, those little things that you do every day, things that are quantifiable, I think are a good place to start. So, you know, a big question is, what do we think is the most urgent? Like, what's the most pressing concern? Maybe you're going to ask that later. But, you know, in my opinion, consumption in our society is a huge one. And I think just being aware of where our products are coming from, and B, like how they're made. And that involves a lot of research, right? And luckily there are some resources that can help us do that, because it's hard to know, you know, and there's marketing that totally masks everything. One resource that I like, and it's also an app, which is really cool, I think you can download it for maybe $2, is the Better World Shopper. Okay. And that's one that helps, it ranks companies from anywhere from airlines to shoes to apparel to food, chocolate, beer even. Wow, it ranks it from A to F. So a lot of these things are pretty obvious, right? Like Walmart is probably going to be low, you know, it's an F, I mean, things like that. But, you know, REI is maybe like an A or a B. Yeah. But some of them aren't actually that obvious. You know, you look at airlines and it's like, how do you tell? Right. And so it breaks it down not only by their environmental responsibility, but also social responsibility, how they treat their employees, where they're sourcing their things, you know, and how transparent they are. You know, if it's a bank, for example, Bank of America was like an F. So it's just interesting to look at that, and just the things that we buy and purchase and the services that we use every day can make a huge impact, you know?
Right.
And,
yeah,
you know,
that makes a lot of sense. And, you know, it's just very consistent with, I've always been passionate about voting with your dollar, you know,
right.
Like, and that's true even with things like body image and just all the bullshit messages about women and their bodies, that, you know, it doesn't mean that those magazines are going to stop being made, for example, but you don't have to buy them. And if you are buying them, you are supporting that in a sense, you know? So being able to support the companies, even if we know obviously Walmart's not going anywhere, but if we can support these other companies, you know, you're voting with your dollar and you're, you know, giving them a chance.
Right. And that makes a huge difference for them, because most of those companies that are being more responsible, you don't hear, you know, you read it. I love looking at the Better World Shopper, and it's so, like, there's these obscure chocolate companies, and, like, for them to compete with Hershey's is kind of crazy. You think, it's not going to make a big difference if I don't buy Hershey's, but if you do support the other ones, you know, it's all about doing more good, you know, and then instead of focusing less bad, do more good, like support those companies.
Yes.
I actually got that off from, there's a book called Cradle to Cradle, and it's about, you know, building a society that still accepts technology and, you know, says, you know, yes, we are in a society where we can't just move backwards. We have to move forwards, and technology is a part of that. How can we integrate that into our society, into our culture in a way that is still, you know, involving nature? It's still taking into account other species and things like that. Yeah. And I love this guy, William McDonough is the writer, and he says it's, you know, people complain about population, and yes, having this many people on Earth, maybe we're reaching carrying capacity. You know, maybe we, you know, if everyone lived like an American, it would take 7 planet Earths to support us, just with resource use and waste and stuff like that. Or there's some figure, I kind of pulled that one out of thin air. But I like his point, is that every baby born is a miracle. We shouldn't be sad about humans on Earth, because every person born is another resource, is another brain, is another, you know, very ingenious being that might come up with some solutions. So let's focus on that, being not focus on less bad, but on how we can be more good. And I think that's a very positive way to look at things.
Yeah, definitely. And again, it's really consistent with a lot of the other kind of messages that resonate with me, just psychologically, emotionally, that we are often focusing on what we want less of in life. Like, I don't want to feel anxiety, I don't want to feel fear, I don't want to feel shame, like whatever these things are. So then we do all these things that are risk averse, and we don't stretch ourselves and we don't grow. And also, when we're so focused on what we want less of and doing all of this avoidance, these, you know, whether it's numbing out with alcohol or food or whatever, shopping. But when we're so focused on what we want less of, we have very little energy left for focusing on what we want more of in life. And that's so similar to that. I love it.
Cool.
So Better World Shopper, Cradle to Cradle. Okay, I'll make sure to put links to those.
Awesome. There's another one that I really like if you're into seafood, like obviously we are, is that Seafood Watch Guide that you were talking about, the one I put out. That is also an app, which is much easier to update than the tiny little wallet guide. And kids love that too. Every time I pulled that out with 7th graders, they're always like, oh my gosh, I eat this all the time. Wow. So, and for them to be stoked on it, it's like adults are also really excited about it. And it's just another cool way that you can go into a restaurant. And again, when you look at the list, it's green, yellow, and red. It's like a traffic light. And so it's a really easy way to identify, okay, which ones are going to be the best? Like, how can I make the best purchase and support this industry with my dollar versus, focusing on the bad. So that's another cool way that whether you're, shopping for, fish, or you're in a restaurant or whatever, and you're also educating people on the way. I don't know how many servers or sushi chefs, when you sit at the bar, have looked at it and been like, wow, this is really cool, and you can give it to them, and like, take that, I've got it on my phone. Yeah. It's pretty empowering for them to know that their customers care about where their food is coming from, and that, if they don't know, they should know, right? It's like, where is this tuna from? And if they can't answer that, it maybe plants a seed in their brain that, wow, my customers actually care where our seafood is from. We should know, and we should provide that information. And then along that journey, they become more aware. And that's great, because that's the industry, right? And that's how you kind of infect change. So
right. Yeah. We were at Whole Foods today after church, and that's where we go and get our fish. And I'm terrible because I can't even remember now what kind of fish it was from where, but I know it was wild. And it was one of the whole fish, and we'd never gotten one of those before, but it was on sale. And so I was like, why don't we try that? And then the guy's like, okay, what do you want me to do? Oh, good. So you handle that. Because I have no idea where to start. He's like, oh yeah, I mean, we do this for everyone. But it was so cool watching him, the fishmonger, kind of scale it and everything. And then we took home the kind of skeleton in the head and then put it in the blender, because he said that if you grind it up and then put it in the ground, so Chris, that's what Chris is doing right now, is he ground up the fish, and now he's putting it in the ground and planting herbs on top of it. So we'll see if maybe this year we don't kill all of our herbs, and if so, then I will thank the fish. Yeah,
awesome. I mean, the Native Americans did that too, right? Like, you can thank the Native Americans who were, after they would gut and clean a fish, they would discard all that stuff right onto their corn or whatever crop it may be.
Yeah.
So it's kind of cool to look back in history and see what, we've actually learned from maybe not our ancestors, but
right.
To see them. They are our ancestors. We're all humans, right?
Yeah.
And it's cool to see those legacies like haven't been lost.
Colonialism and imperialism aside, right?
Beauty of Thanksgiving. There's something we learned from that.
So definitely with what we buy, what we consume. What about with recycling? Because that's a question that I always have, because I think, and I get on my husband for this, because he'll just like throw random things in there. I'm like, I don't even think that's recyclable. Then they're going to throw the whole thing away, and they're not going to recycle any of it. So I don't know if there's anything like, are there things that people commonly try to recycle that really shouldn't be? I know styrofoam is very rare that there are places that recycle it, right?
Right. I think it depends on where you live as well. I know that there are places where you can just chuck it all into the same bin, and the city pays people to recycle, or to separate it.
Right.
Where it goes, and then other places you have to be meticulous, or like you said, they throw it out completely, the baby in the bathwater, whatever. So it's tricky. You have to kind of know your own area, I guess, and look into that. And I'm sorry, I don't have a better answer, but what I do know is that a lot of what we do throw into those bins gets carted away. I know on the West Coast, and when I was in Texas, I researched this in college as well, our plastic gets sent to China. So, it doesn't get processed locally in the U.S. We export that to China. They process it there where, environmental regulations are far lower, as well as standards for their employees, their health, So these people are working in these factories that don't have a lot of oversight, where the laws are not as strict. So they're coming home with toxic chemicals, and actual toxic chemicals, not like the ones that, you and I talk about. Yeah. We don't have to worry compared to other countries. Like, I can be, and so then, it comes back to us in the form of disposable items. It might be playground equipment or little toys for McDonald's,
Yeah.
Happy Value meals or whatever. And these things aren't just being made into new plastic bottles. Once that plastic is melted down, it degrades and is no longer usable. It's not of the same quality.
Yeah.
So it now becomes a single-use item. So even that term recycling is a little bit misleading because it's not constantly going through a cycle. It's still a cradle to grave mentality, right? So I think what's better is, I see you and I both drinking out of these. We've got our reusable bottles are far better. And if you live in a place where the tap water is, good and drinkable, awesome. I think that's a great place to start. They say reduce, reuse, recycle.
Yeah.
So reducing the amount of plastic we're using is definitely best. And I know it's really difficult because you go to the grocery store and you want to buy, the pint of juice and all that. And how can you do that without processing, buying plastic? So
right.
It's really tough, but
yeah.
I think that's a good question. And knowing too, like, do I need to use water to wash it before I put it into the bin?
Yeah.
There's all these
no, and that's another thing that like I've been torn about recently and was going to ask you. And again, like, it's not like you have the scientific equation in your head of what's better. Yeah. But I always, when there's something like glass, for instance, or even sometimes plastic, where I'm like, okay, for me to actually get all this stuff out of here, like peanut butter or whatever, although that rinses fairly easily, but it would take more water than, like, is it worth it? Should I just chunk it in the trash,
Right. And you're in Tennessee. I don't know how the drought is treating you all, but here in California, I'm almost, it's quick for me to almost say, like, if it's glass, I don't want to say chuck it in the ocean, but, I would like to use the precious water that we do have to put this water, put this glass into a recycling bin, and then the amount of heat and energy that it takes to melt glass down or to process that, recycling glass is really energy intensive. They say aluminum is the one that, is the most energy efficient, and then it can actually get made into another aluminum can, I believe. I'm not 100% on that, but that one is the one that is the most, like, if you chuck an aluminum can in the recycling bin, you can feel better about it. But when it comes to glass,
my LaCroix.
yeah, I feel good about that. But yeah, it's tough, because you want to reduce, your consumption of those things. It can be tricky. Yeah.
When I was growing up, my mom always had those, like, the big blue 5-gallon water thing.
Right.
And I love that.
Yeah,
and I want to get one because we had, like, the faucet filter, and then I was like, this tastes worse than the regular water. So now we're just doing tap water, which is fine. But yeah, I feel like, a lot of people have the filters in their fridge or whatever. And I know more and more people are using bottles, and even just that one small thing is huge if you're not already doing it to do it.
Right. And for those who don't recycle, it's like, okay, start there. Right? It's pretty to set up a bin. My even jokes when we're over at my aunt and uncle's house. He's like, if you don't have recycling already, Nicole will set it up for you. Like, she's going to do it out of pure.
I love it.
It's passion or annoyance. We're not really sure, but.
So, and then with the sustainable seafood, we know about that. Is there anything else big that people should know about in terms of just kind of little lifestyle changes or food changes?
Definitely. When we're talking about the most urgent concerns, the most pressing things, I hate to beat a dead horse, but this is the horse that might end up killing us all. It really is climate change. And the fact that there are people who are still denouncing that on Fox News is absurd to me.
But all it was really cold this winter, Nicole.
You're right. When 95% of scientists agree on something, it's almost pretty much fact. Like, 95% of scientists, like, rarely agree on anything.
Right.
And to be honest, the media hype is terrifying, but that is really the biggest, concern, because it's 10, 20, 100-fold the consequences that it has, and it's not just changing, weather. That's so short-sighted. When you see the polar ice caps melting, and they are, what you get is a positive feedback, right? So as the sun hits that ice, when you have a lot of ice, that color reflects sunlight, right? Well, as that ice melts and becomes smaller, now you have darker water surrounding all of this ice, so more of that's being absorbed. That heat is being absorbed. That's warming the oceans, and it's causing the ice to melt even faster. Now, what that does is you have warming oceans. Who cares, right? Like, okay, some fish species die, but, nature's resilient, it'll bounce back. What happens is the currents, the like prevailing currents that are around the globe start to change. And what we do know is that that also affects our local climate and local temperature, and that could impact very heavily where we grow food. You know, the climate of Bordeaux in France, you know, is going to change, and then your Bordeaux wine is not going to be in Bordeaux. And, you know, that's kind of a first world problem, so to speak. When you start talking about, you know, the bread belt, the bread basket, you know, in the middle of our nation, or California going through this extreme drought, this stuff is, you know, scientists are saying directly linked to climate change. And there are no questions that the amount of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere have gone up significantly, and it's an exponential growth since industrialization. That's not a question. Right. Now, this is overwhelming, right? Having all this information sounds like we're in peril. What can we do? And it feels like there's nothing, right? And what one person does doesn't impact it. Well, you know, that's not true at all. I think if every person just relied on themselves and we did do little things, you know, in our daily lives, we really can create a difference and an impact. And that coupled with, you know, industry as well as governments being more responsible. And again, that comes back to voters being responsible, being informed, and putting people into power who they can actually trust and support.
Right.
So we're getting into all this stuff. What can we do? The real bread and butter, what we want to talk about is climate change, in my opinion. Those little things, you know, if you can't change the route that you drive to work, like you said, you know, purchasing a vehicle that is going to be more fuel efficient. And for those trips that are more local, you know, if you can ride a bike or walk or take public transit, awesome, you know.
Right.
Let's see, I think that rethinking your needs, so it's really easy to say, you know, reduce, reuse, recycle, that's great, you got 3 hours. Well, I think a really important thing is just rethink what it is that we need. Like, how badly do you need that new iPhone 6 or 7 or whatever we're at this point? We're probably at 8. I don't even know.
Look at my iPhone 6 over here.
You know, again, it's not about feeling guilty. Right. It's about having the knowledge and feeling empowered to make more informed decisions. So if you do want that upgrade, what's something else that you could, you know, live without? Right. What's, you know, and knowing that, like, plastics. Like, I like to challenge people to take the plastic challenge and try to buy as little plastic, or just buying in bulk. Like, your mom buys water that's in a 5-gallon jug instead of individual containers. You know, we have those options. We have that luxury, which is really nice.
So we should all get Costco memberships, especially because Costco is a very ethical company, right?
So ethical. I don't know what it gets in the better
shopper.
Are they really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they're like the anti-Sam's Club. They're a really good company.
Huh. Yeah. I just always get lost in those places.
Yeah. I love that, though, that idea of rethink. And, I mean, that's just like, I know I'm going to be thinking a lot more about this because I'm better now, but I've always been kind of like that mentality of, oh my God, I'm about to run out of this. I better replace it. Or, you know, just that kind of feeling of I need this. And even though my purchases are not as frivolous as they used to be, they're still purchases. You know, it's still stuff. And looking at, you know, how that impacts my overall footprint, I guess.
Right. Well, and speaking of footprint, I think there is an actual pretty moving, or I guess it was profound for me when I first calculated my environmental footprint, or I think it's called ecological footprint. You go to ecologicalfootprint.org and you just enter in a lot of basics about your lifestyle and how often you travel and stuff like that. And I thought, you know, I've, you know, got it made. I'm probably like really low on this chart or whatever. And after doing that, I realized it would take 4 planet Earths to sustain a population. What we have on Earth right now is somewhere around 7 billion people and growing. If all of those people lived the lifestyle I do, we would need like 4.5 planet Earths. And I was like, oh my God, like this is, you know, and again, it's not about feeling overwhelmed and guilty. It's like, oh, so I can be better. What are some things that I can do, you know? And things like, you know, flying. I try to take Amtrak when I can. And on the coast, it's easier. You know, in California, we have more options. You can take Amtrak. It's not as easy in Tennessee or Texas, but, you know, other things that you can do are just really minimizing plastic. That's a huge one. Okay. The amount that it takes, you know, for this disposable society that we now live in, plastic, the creation of it, you know, it's oil, right? It's a petroleum product. So you're extracting that from the earth. The production of it creates a lot of greenhouse gases. So before it even gets to the consumer, you already have some pretty significant issues. By the time we use it, you know, it's something that You might throw away, you might recycle. A lot of plastic doesn't get recycled. It might get sent to a landfill, or, you know, worse, it ends up somewhere where it's never going to break down.
Yeah.
And that's what I think people don't realize. You know, I spent some time in Thailand, and the amount of styrofoam and plastic bags drifting around, I have to imagine that people just think that it breaks down, and it really doesn't. It does get smaller, it breaks down into smaller pieces, but it doesn't biodegrade. So essentially, it just becomes even more toxic as the sun breaks it down, and as it becomes its more simple pieces, it just gets worse, you know, especially if it ends up in the ocean. And you might have heard of like the gyres of plastic that are floating around out there, creating these dead zones, you know, ecologically. So that's, sorry, that little tangent about
no, I
plastic.
mean, that makes sense. And I think more and more people are kind of doing that. And
Yeah.
for other reasons too, like, you know, being all freaked out about BPA and other things like in Tupperware and stuff like that. But so I have the Pyrex little food storage things now, which is awesome, and I see more people with those. But then I'm like, but the lid is plastic. What am I gonna do? I can't have a glass lid on a glass container. But you know, it is. I know that it's better than just having like gazillion plastic containers. And
It's about longevity, right?
exactly. Yeah.
The 1 day plastic or the 1 year plastic, you know, like there's definitely a better option. And you know, when it comes to food, that's definitely my favorite topic. And it's one that everybody can relate to. So, you know, first of all, when you're going to the supermarket, I sometimes, depending on where I am, I might look like a crazy person when I walk in with like my duffel bag, you know, and I'm like carrying out all my groceries in like my bag that carries soccer cleats. But places where like that's totally normal, where everyone is doing it. So I think it's, you know, kind of fun to like look like that outlier person, and to just do it, you know. It's like you're saving how many plastic bags from being used when you do that, and you're setting an example, you know, for young people, for people your age. You know, there are people who are older than me even who've been like, oh, okay, wow, you know, they see you doing this, and I think that makes a big difference. Instead of preaching at people, it's like just leading by example, I think, is the best way
to change, right?
Right.
And in Austin, you know, they made plastic bags, they like got rid of them entirely.
Yeah. A lot of counties in California have done that as well. And so then when it comes to buying that food, right, you're in the supermarket, I think even more than organic, I love the organic movement. And yes, organic, you know, is healthier. I don't think there's a ton of science out there that says that, you know, pesticides are extremely detrimental to humans. It is detrimental to ecosystems. And it has the term, you know, pesticide, herbicide. The word, the side means, you know, kill, death.
That biodiversity is
not right. You know, so if you're not worried about human health so much, which I think that there are some definite indicators that it could be potentially harmful to humans, definitely is harmful on an ecological scale. So, you know, buying organic and avoiding, you know, GMOs and all the unknown side effects of that, you know, new up-and-coming industry. I think it's important, but more important than that, I think, is local. You're eating locally in general, you're supporting your local economy, right? You're not having to create greenhouse gases by importing everything, right? If it's coming from nearby, you're avoiding all the transportation costs of everything, and that's hidden costs as well, right? Not just like the money. And you're buying usually what's in season, because if it's local, it probably hasn't been stored, you know, in a huge warehouse somewhere on the other side of the country for a while. It's coming in fresh. Eating in season kind of goes hand in hand with eating locally. So I think when it comes to making food decisions, that's really the big one. That's the one we're going to affect the most change. You're supporting your local farmers. You're reducing the amount of greenhouse gases that are bringing that food in. And, you know, frankly, it's going to be cheaper for you. You know, even if it's not organic, I would probably choose local over organic, given the choice.
And especially that's some types of food where it really, you know, in terms of the impact on the human health, it doesn't really matter if it's like a banana where you're not eating the outside, or, you know, a lemon or something like that.
Yeah, there's a dirty dozen and a cleanest
like
list, you know. In general, if you just look at it and it has a thick skin that you're not going to eat, if you have to make the choice, sure, buy those things that you're going to peel the outside, you know, the onion, the watermelon, all that. Things like, you know, strawberries and blueberries, things where you're eating the whole thing. If you could choose to buy those organic, that would probably be a better, you know, option. But then there are certain foods like, there are certain, you know, produce that they don't use as much pesticide or herbicide to begin with. things like cranberries because they already are quite bitter, and so that's a natural pest deterrent, which you see in a lot of food. So, depending on the crop.
Right. And of course, there's the whole political landscape of the food labels and organic, like, who gets to call their milk organic, and we're not going to have Horizon Milks in Whole Foods anymore because of XYZ. It's crazy how political all that gets.
Totally. So I think my favorite thing is just going to farmers markets because it just can't go wrong. You have a really family-friendly atmosphere where you know that you're supporting your local economy, and you can talk to the farmers or at least their employees directly and say, hey, how do you grow your food? Do you use organic methods? Oh, you can't afford to be certified organic, but you use organic methods. I would like to support you. You clearly need, again, going for more good, not less bad. And I just find that those are always I always feel good after having spent a morning in a farmer's market. You have this awesome bag of amazing food where you talk to smiling people, or that curmudgeon-y old man who's like really eccentric. It's always great, and I feel like you just can't go wrong with that, and especially if you have kids. I think that's a great way to show them how important it is that what we put into our bodies, that makes all the difference.
Definitely. Do you remember the farm patch?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love the farm patch.
Necessarily always local.
Which is odd.
Last time I went there, but it has the right idea. Open air market, it does a lot
better
of Texas.
Than maybe some HEBs and all that. So
the giant pumpkins around Thanksgiving.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's a ton of good information, and I'm really glad that I have it recorded because you said a lot of things that I know I'm going to have to listen to a few times to really soak in, and even just kind of being able to retain all of your amazing experience that you've had. I'm always like, I can't really tell you what Nicole does because it's really complicated. Now I'll just be able to listen to this again and be able to articulate it. So trying to think is there anything else you feel like you want to add? I feel like we've covered a lot of bases.
Yeah, I think that it really depends on the next generation that's coming up. What kind of legacy do we want to leave for them, right? I think that, we've been given this earth, and sometimes, what we've inherited from our parents, we feel like we've been slighted, like they made all these decisions, and in hindsight, it's easy to fault them for that. But I think things like, the Green Revolution, which wasn't actually all that green because it did introduce pesticides to the scene and things like that. Well, they did it trying to feed people, right? They were trying to feed the most people as our population grew. They had good intentions. So I think it's important to keep those good intentions, but also use the sound science that we have to make more informed decisions, which we're fully capable of doing. It just takes a little extra step in, researching what we eat, where it comes from, what we purchase, the people that we elect, And I think that when you just live in a way that, is just more aware, more informed, children are going to see that as well. They're going to want to make those decisions. They're sponges. And I think it's as simple as just reading the Lorax to your kids. That had a profound impact on me.
Okay, sorry about that. We lost our connection for a minute. Nicole doesn't have the most reliable internet being on an island. But I'm really glad that it's worked very well so far. So anyway, back to what you were saying.
All right. So basically, I think that, you hear about all the riots going on in Baltimore, and I feel like until we have compassion for one another and until we foster that kind of appreciation for just humans among humans, it's going to be really hard to encourage people to love nature and to go, spend time changing their lives. So I think that's the best thing that we can do is really raise this next generation to be caring individuals and just expose them to nature. I know that not everybody lives near Yosemite, and that's fine. If you just take a child or, you yourselves go spend time out in a park nearby and just appreciate a tiny blade of grass or something like that. Just take that time to appreciate. I think that it'll really encourage us to change those small behaviors, because once we realize how, fortunate we are and how amazing this earth is, I think that it'll really cause us to make those changes that are necessary. So whether it's, preparing one meal a day that's vegetarian, that can save many gallons of water and barrels of oil by just like reducing our meat consumption, or, trying to go for an afternoon stroll instead of driving to the movie theater. Whatever it is, whatever those things are that you would enjoy doing anyway, just trying to incorporate that into your life a little bit more. And then again, making those informed decisions when it comes to what we purchase and, where we spend our holidays. Are you going to go backpacking or do you want to go on a cruise, and
Mm-hmm.
speaking from someone who's actually going to be working on a cruise ship this summer.
Teaching about the environment, right, to the next generation.
Giving lectures on why, shark finning is bad. But that being said, I just think that, we just got to love each other. And then eventually, the earth is resilient and she can recover, but we need to treat her more kindly because at this rate, it's not looking too good. But I do believe in us.
Yeah.
I believe we can do it.
Amen. Amen. I mean, that's why just a huge influence for me is just the interconnected web of life, and that includes people and that includes plants and animals and me being able to be okay with that I'm not perfect, but I can always do better,
Yeah.
So, and I think that's true for all of us. Well, thank you so very much
Thank
for
you.
coming on and talking to my readers, my viewers, I guess. So this was a really good conversation, and I will be sharing it around. I hope you share it around too.
Oh, I will.
And I hope to see you soon. I better see you soon.
I know.
So
I miss
Christmas 2015?
Christmas 2015.
Woohoo! All right. Thanks so much for coming on. I'll make sure to include some of those links and about the kelp program and all of that so people can check that out.
Cool.
All
Thanks.
right. Bye.